Perhaps one aspect of this which you've raised, and I perhaps just wanted to amplify a little bit, is I guess there's also the realization, that we may not always be the person who has the answer. And when we start to look into the past and into the future, it may not be always our version of what the past looked like, or our version what the future would look like. Other people participate in this. Other people inform us. We start to get other opinions or other voices in the room to start to contribute. And perhaps if I could turn to you, Tashmia, perhaps in some of our conversations, what are some of the examples that you have seen of organizations and even individuals who've had to sense make their way out, as they think of how we emerge out of this crisis, that their answer was not, or the answer was not always theirs. How did they go about making sense of when there isn't an immediate answer in their immediate environment, whether it's their own management team or even in their own personal domain? Any thoughts around that?
Yeah, so prior to the SCE position, I taught at a business school and did a lot of executive innovation programs with companies. And of course, you've got to teach a range of case studies on how companies dealt with particular problems. And a common theme emerges in how many of these companies dealt with it, which was the answer doesn't sit with a lone genius. There's never that single leader who has all the answers. And most of the successful case studies and companies that we've actually worked with were able to create some kind of brains trust. And the most successful ones, given the speed of change, given the amount that happens outside a company versus in, there were platforms that were created which allowed internal management to connect into the network of ideas outside of that company. An example of this was Lego's Kuso in Japan. Lego was in a lot of trouble. They were running out of ideas. So they created a platform where they crowdsourced ideas for the next Lego set. And if the idea of a person from the public who posted it got 10,000 likes, Lego would make that set. An example closer to home is, yes, very quickly pivoted into multiple opportunities and projects to create jobs, even in lockdown. So we've started a network of entrepreneurs in township communities to make masks, to try to get incomes and jobs back into those communities. And what we were able to do is set up a brains trust of really clever people who are also patriots, want to make a contribution, and just take a little bit of their time to collaborate with them. It's very different asking someone to physically be present in a sprint, but if you ask them to give you 1.5 hours in a virtual sprint, you get a very different reaction. So there are ways to tap into crowdsourcing your ideas, but the common theme is the answer never lies with the leader of the organization, but the leader can connect the organization to outside ideas.
So one of the themes that we're certainly going to speak about today is the role of leadership in both fostering this kind of innovation, in being open, transparent, willing enough to engage with other organizations. And that often has significant implications for the organization itself, not just for the leader. And finally, to be able to find the value, find the opportunities in these emerging areas, whether for social good or whether for profit. So certainly a theme that we're going to come back to. But let's talk a little bit more about leadership in these uncertain times. One of the things that has really impressed me in this time, and we've been working with leadership teams both here locally as well as from our office in Southeast Asia in a number of countries. And one of the things that has really impressed us is that duality between the need for leaders to deal with the immediate, the right now, the crisis, the information that has come to light right now, today, that needs a reaction, a response, a reallocation of resources, tasking of people, creating focus, and the realization that we need to think differently and to act deliberately to create something new. That simply if we keep on responding to today's news, we won't necessarily emerge out of the crisis. So it's this very interesting case of being very strategic in terms of how we create a pathway out of the crisis, and at the same time being able to respond almost with this immediacy around what hit us today, whether it's a colleague that faces challenges, whether it's a business situation, whether it's a financial crunch. And it's been really interesting how leaders are trying to make sense of both these very different and often conflicting set of requirements. Um, would you describe the kind of leadership that is seen as effective in this particular stage of emerging out of the crisis? Perhaps let's start with you, Tashmia.
Right. So I think vulnerability is probably the word that flashes to mind when you say that. Having an acceptance that you actually don't know and you don't have the answer immediately. And how are you going to lean on your team members? How are you going to be patient with yourself? And understand that you need to build a set of capabilities and capacities in your team to be able to manage this. You know, I try to keep a circle of fellow CEOs, particularly females, around me. And I can tell you that something like this did not enter our conversations. There was absolutely no way that we were going to predict, or anybody that I knew was going to predict circumstances like this unfolding. What helps is when you have built a team that is ready for change. It might not have been this sort of change, but can you create a team that is agile and that is able to do things differently? Not all team members, it's impossible to assemble a team with everybody who's going to be have that level of agility, but can you very quickly bring in the resources to help those team members who are going to be stuck with this kind of sort of anxiety paralysis, to help them through and move the business forward? And I think, you know, what you're starting to allude to is the idea of innovation management, which is how do I structure my management teams, my organizational style of leadership, and my organizational structures that enable for those quick pivots.